Got questions about spiritual life, relationships, inner peace, or navigating everyday challenges with grace? Welcome to Ask A Swami, a Q&A series where you ask, and Swamis from Yasodhara Ashram share their insights and experiences. In this episode, I speak with Swami Satyananda about navigating crises and supporting loved ones.
Murali Krishna, Mukunda Krishna, Mohana Krishna, Krishna Krishna.
Hello, Swami Satyananda, and welcome to Ask A Swami.
Thank you, Katie. Happy to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you here at the ashram, and we'll get started with our first question. Someone asks, Dear Swami, how can I navigate and view health scares and incidents from a spiritual perspective?
That is such an interesting question, and I find that exploring those kinds of questions from the spiritual perspective help to bring it into daily life. So there really isn't a separation between what's happening in daily life and then spiritual life. So that I have this separate thing happening. And so things come up in life. They come up all the time. And challenges come. It's kind of like the lake. Where we are right now, we're looking out at the lake. And it's pretty calm right now. But when we're out on the lake, and lately I've had the chance a couple of times to kayak on the lake, but I have to watch. It's a very large lake, Kootenay Lake, so I have to watch what are the conditions, what might be coming up quickly, how do I navigate this? So I really like that the questioner, the person who asked this question, used that word navigate, because life is like that. There are these waves of change that come. It might be an illness that comes up, or a follow-up call from a test or doctor's office that calls, and all of a sudden, you think, oh, I felt fine, I'm okay, but all of a sudden there's follow-up tests happening, or a job loss or loss of someone significant in our life. It can also be a dream that comes that seems like some kind of warning dream as well. So anything that kind of takes us off balance. And from the yogic perspective, balance really is something key that we keep coming back to for ourselves and in our communities or families. So when something seems, oh gosh, I'm off balance, it could be physically showing up. Oftentimes the body is giving messages when we're off balance. It could be our thoughts, mental patterns, thought patterns, just not able to get back on track. Could be emotionals, and the emotions are all stirred up. And all of that, from the yogic perspective, all of that is connected. Our bodies, our minds, our emotions, the spiritual. So that's why my first response to the question is there isn't a separation between the spiritual and the life. Everything. We're humans, so every part of us is involved with that. And then the yogic teachings help us come back into balance, back into harmony. And sometimes that can take a long time, depending what's come up. And so if it is some kind of crisis in our lives that is really very, very deeply challenges to the core, that's where our practices come in. And it's so important to have a foundation of practices. I found this from my own experience, that daily commitment to my spiritual practices has been there to really support and sustain me when something has come up that has challenged me to the core, and I don't, and sometimes when that's happened, I don't have the thought, oh, I have to turn to my breath or I have to turn to my mantra. It's there. It's there supporting me. And so that is something that I feel is really important to convey. And I've heard it so many times from other people as well, that when they are going through suffering in some way, that then that not only is their own foundation there, but also they're able to receive support from others on that more unseen level, but it is something that is very, very concrete and real. So you can just let go into that. And I wanted to mention also specifically about the Kundalini yoga system and how when something comes up that is a scare or a panic kind of response, then it's human to go to that place of survival and security. So that's been threatened in some way. And it can almost feel, I've heard that expression, and, in those times in my life, like the foundation is gone. I've heard that expression, the rug's pulled out from underneath me, or that sense of foundation is crumbled or just not there in the same way. So something like that can be a shock and can trigger that security, survival. And then the imagination can kick in pretty fast. We start to experience some symptoms, physical symptoms, and all of a sudden the imagination is like imagining the worst. And so it's knowing that, how does the imagination work? How can I direct it? How can I use that part of me that's human and guide? And then the emotions get involved. So those first 3 chakras, they can become a loop. And each of those parts of us is helpful when they're directed. But sometimes we're caught in it and can't get out of it. And so it is being able to bring in a practice, for example, like the breath, which is a simple practice to go to from the 4th chakra, the heart. It can lift us, even if we get dragged back into that loop, can lift us to that place where we can go, oh, can land here. What do I know? What do I know from my experience? And so this Kundalini system is amazingly helpful in understanding our own patterns, and that they're part of being human, and that we can learn something about ourselves in this process, and also take steps to change patterns. And all of this comes to being able to be there to support others. From our own learning, can support others when they're going through a crisis as well.
I really appreciate how you've really outlined the Kundalini system, the first 3 chakras, and how we can get caught in that cycle of survival, the need for security, when an illness comes up or a health scare of sorts, whether it's an accident, an incident like you mentioned, or an ongoing thing. How we can really fall back into that survival instinct of what am I going to do, that kind of feeling of what I have experienced of anxiety, and then the imagination comes in, thinking the worst of the worst, and the emotions, and you speaking about the importance of practice and how having that foundation allows those practices to kind of appear very naturally. And hearing you say that kind of took me back to a doctor's office that I was in recently, waiting to have some tests done. And the mantra just showed up, like without me thinking about it or wanting it to, it just showed up. And it was such an example of, after having this practice for myself for a little while, how it can show up for me and support me when I most need it. And so I really appreciate you kind of speaking about that, because it is like, I feel that very deeply. And there are times still where the imagination just has such a mind of its own and keeps going and keeps going. And that loop can be difficult to get out of. And I wonder, like, based on your own experience with different health incidents, like what has kept you going?
Well, I think that's a really important aspect of this all, is the keeping on going. And I know my spiritual teacher, Swami Radhananda, they kept saying that, just keep on going. And somehow it's really penetrated for me. This past year, I did have an accident last year, and it's been a much longer than I had been hoping, healing process. And so the first step is getting the support that's needed, so the medical help and everything else. And I have to say, Swami Radha was such a good example for me about this, and observing her. She had rheumatoid arthritis, and being with her and living with her and seeing how she kept exploring, but she took care, made sure that that medical part was taken care of, and then kept researching and open to new ways, watching her dreams. So it really had an influence on me. And so through this year, I've also paid attention to, at times when I spiraled down, or that would start to happen, and then reminding myself, well, actually, that doesn't lead anywhere. And it is part of being human, and acknowledging the feelings and having some times of tears and like, wow, this is taking so much longer than I had hoped for. I'm not able to do the things that I would normally do. And then keeping on going. And acceptance is really a big part of it, a part of the healing journey. And then recently I had a catch-up appointment with my medical doctor, and she said, I am just so amazed at how you've kept going. She said, you've persevered with this, and through it all, healing has taken place. And so I think it's really important to keep track of ideals as well, because I'm an elder, and there can be concepts or perceptions of an elder within, for example, the medical system. Well, you're at a certain age and these things come up. And I kept the vision of, no, I'm going to heal from this. And of course, it means changes and things that I'm doing in my life. But I think our ideals are really, really important in all of this. So being able to bring in that sense of patience and compassion for ourselves in all of this. But I'm glad that you mentioned that, keeping on going. It's also really important to know that we're not alone. When something like this comes up, for myself, I've just given an example, and Katie, you've given an example. But when there is something that really is a crisis in our lives, it's important to remember that we aren't alone, and to reach out to friends or community. I'm very blessed to have both here at the ashram. And ultimately, what we're doing is really engaging with that source of compassion and love within ourselves. And so in the ways, whatever way is meaningful, to keep that connection going, because guidance and help will come. And that's the most important. I mean, I feel that these incidents that come up are really there to help me keep going to that part of myself, that wise part of myself, that part that knows. And then something like what I was mentioning with the Kundalini system, there are practices and ways of understanding ourselves that help bring us back to that place of inner knowing.
And I think it's important, like you've already mentioned the Kundalini system, the practices that are there, and now bringing forward the importance of community and support. And I know for myself, I can tend to, when I'm going through a difficult time, especially when it has to do with like a health thing, I have this tendency to want to push the world away from me and to kind of be in my own sadness or grief or worry. And so I have that tendency to initially do that. And then sometimes someone will reach out or I'll think of saying something to someone. And it makes such a difference to be able to put into words how I'm feeling, not only to myself or to my journal, but to someone else who is listening. And like you said, can hold that compassion and show that empathy towards me. It makes such a difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. And that leads to how do we be present for others? And the first part of this question, I think, is about how to navigate. We're learning ourselves. We're learning about ourselves. We see our patterns. And then we learn to be present for ourselves. And we know what helps, in reaching out to others. What's helpful, what's not helpful. And so all of that gets integrated, whether consciously or not, it gets integrated into times when we want to support someone else or loved ones that are going through a crisis in their lives.
And I think that so gracefully leads us to our next question for our time together today. Someone asks, "Dear Swami, how can I support a loved one who is going through a crisis?"
Well, I feel that the most important part of this is letting them know that you're there. And that can simply be, and actually it's quite profound, to be present and to listen. To really listen without the mind going, well, I think this could help or that could help or whatever, which we all sincerely want to help, but we don't know what is actually needed. And again, to come back to the very practical, if it's an emergency, definitely act on that and get that kind of help that's needed. Whether it's physical or a mental emergency or whatever, there has to be a response right away. And here at the ashram, we are very, very careful about the words that we use. And the Devi of speech is actually part of the Kundalini system. And so a number of years ago, we decided not everything's an emergency and to distinguish between what's an emergency and what's an incident. And I found that really, really helpful. So at the ashram, we've learned to distinguish between what is an emergency and what's an incident that we need to respond to, because it really brings different kinds of responses. And if we're thinking everything's an emergency, it's just taking that moment, and a moment can be all that it takes is, yes, I have to call 911 and respond, or no, I can pause here, I can do what's needed, and I can call for help. And so there's preparation And we do a lot of preparation here. I always think it's like we do our part, and then the divine, the light, takes care of the rest or lets us know what else we need to do. So we are entering into forest fire season here. There's a lot of preparation that we do, and we hope and pray that we're not in that situation. But we know that we've done the best that we can do. And I think that's important in supporting loved ones, people that we care about. If it isn't sudden, but it's a long-term thing, then thinking about it, taking that time, what is going to really serve or be of help in the situation? And then other things are sudden that come on. I know, Katie, you're involved with supporting not only yourself right now, but your family with the war in Iran that's come up.
Yeah, I mean, crisis, like talk about crisis. And it's been, so the time we're recording this, because we don't know when this podcast will come out, but the time we're recording this, it's June 23rd of 2025, and there has been a war in Iran for the last almost 10 days. And that's my homeland. I'm originally from Iran, from Tehran, and immigrated to Canada at a young age. And it's been such a challenge to navigate this crisis where many, many, many relatives reside in Iran, have their homes of years, decades, their lives. And of course, supporting my parents whose whole lives were in Iran until their mid-30s, where they immigrated to Canada. And really learning like what is needed for people and also what is needed for me. So that question of supporting a loved one, I've been really observing how others support me. Some do and some don't. So what I have found is how a simple text message or an email, someone checking in on me and my family, like it's been so incredible. It's been so comforting to know like, oh, these people know what's happening and they care enough to reach out. And I think that's, in many ways, that's all it takes. I've had someone message me who I haven't spoken to in almost a year, who he lives on the other side of the world. And yet when he saw the news, he thought to reach out. Like, that's so meaningful to know that the support is there. Even though, a simple text isn't going to change that much, but that question of what can I do to help? Mm-hmm. How can I support you in this moment? How important those simple phrases can be, especially when someone is struggling, whether it's a crisis like this one that I'm experiencing of war, or if it's an illness like we spoke about before, of what can I do to help? And with that, I think there's also what I'm understanding now is it's like a balancing act. It's like being there for someone, showing that you care, showing that you can support them, but then also like not being too overbearing.
Yeah, because it can get into something that's not helpful. And I really think that what you're saying is so important, which is just reaching out and letting somebody know you're there, and then things will, keeping aware. Again, going back to Swami Radha and being with her. And I would say that was one of the most important learnings and lessons that she was teaching me, was about awareness. And so moving with awareness and picking up on things. Oh, maybe I could bring her, a little coffee right now or something. Or, times when I was caught up in my thoughts and removing something that was actually within the distance that she'd be able to get it herself. Well, getting a blast, which helped because she knew she didn't have a lot of time left to teach me those things. Another part that you mentioned is about your own well-being. And that's so important in all of this, because if we don't take care of ourselves, then we really can't be there in a way that is helpful or that we'd like to be, that doesn't meet our best, it's not our best self. And in situations that are intense, there can be emotional triggers that come up. I feel that's normal. And to take that next step in talking about that, I've been in some long-term caregiving situations with some members of our community. And I didn't have any training in this, but I learned that actually I need to be able to support myself as well. Because some of those situations can go 24 hours a day, like what you're talking about with what's happening in your homeland. And I feel I don't have that experience of living in a land that has war or having those daily experiences, but I really appreciate how you're using that awareness that you have gained through your years of practice to bring to this situation. I also want to mention the divine light invocation as a practice that I have found so, so valuable and precious, because it is a practice where I not only get filled myself, but then I'm also able to give back and place situations and people, loved ones, whatever's happening, into the light and see them surrounded by the light and lifted and receiving whatever they need. And there's so much to that practice, the one to work with for the rest of our lives. And Swami Radha said it has all the yogic teachings in it. It also says to me, I don't have to carry the responsibility. Because once that happens, then I can start to feel a weight. And that's not what this is about. So with the light invocation, it helps to not feel that we're carrying a weight, that we have that support, that there is support coming in ways that we don't have to feel that we have to carry the weight or carry all the responsibility with it.
The divine light invocation can certainly be such a helpful tool and practice to help me lift any emotions that I'm having about a certain situation, and through the practice to feel like I am both asking for support from the divine, from the light, and also providing support, depending on who it is or what symbol, what situation it is that I'm putting in the light. And it has certainly been one of my main practices this week as I am going through this crisis. And I think it's important too to kind of go back to that question of health scares or health involved incidents, because that's a really big crisis too, or it can be. And whether that's an accident or a lifelong health journey, struggle with health, and how valuable it can be to connect with that person, if it's a friend, if it's a parent, someone in the family, and just ask them, like, I feel like we already talked about this, but ask them, what is it that you need to support? Like, what is it that you want in this moment? To go back to that, not being overbearing.
They might not know in the moment.
Right.
But the question has been asked, and so that could percolate. And that's also the other part, too, about the awareness that I was talking about. So picking up on little things. You might make a difference, a gentle touch, little bouquet of flowers, whatever. So being present in that way helps to pick up on things that, as you said, wouldn't be overbearing or into our helper role. It's a way to acknowledge, that caring part of ourselves, and just to do the little things that can help.
And that reminds me of the 5 love languages. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but it's this idea that everyone has different ways that they like to show and be shown love. And like you said, touch, acts of service, gift giving, words of affirmation, quality time, how all of these things can be there to support ourselves and our relationships with people.
Yeah, that's really a good way of putting it. So we're supporting not only our the people that we care about, but supporting ourselves in that. So it's reciprocal in some way.
And I think I also want to mention like the prayer
Me
list.
too. That's exactly what I was going to mention too. Yeah. So the ashram has a prayer list where we're chanting every evening in the temple during satsang. And we have a prayer list currently that has probably about 700 or 800 names called about the souls of people who have passed, the current situations that are happening in the world. And anyway, it's what you can do is reach out to the ashram if you would like to have your name, or if you would like to have the name of someone else on the prayer list, you can check with them to see if, as Katie was saying, that's something that they would like. And then your name will be placed on the prayer list for 3 months. And you know that that support is coming from here, from the Temple of Light, through the mantra, every satsang, every evening for you. We've heard back from so many people what a difference that has made for them going through very challenging times.
Yeah, just another avenue of help and support, the prayer list. Quite wonderful. And something that's coming to my mind as we talk about all of this, navigating health scares, incidents, supporting loved ones, and you've already mentioned this in your own ways, the importance of awareness and understanding that these things happen. And although I might not be able to control what happens to me, what happens to my homeland, what happens to my friends and family, I can control my reactions.
Yes, it's that distinguishing with those words between reaction and responding.
And hearing you speak about all of this and our ongoing conversation about incidents and supporting loved ones and crises is how I can't really control what happens in the world, what happens to my family, but I can control my reactions and my responses and how I deal with these situations.
And I'm picking up on those words, reactions and responses. And it is part of our being human where we do react. And in the moment, and as we talked about earlier, you know, that can go back to imagining what's going to happen in this situation. And there's a deep, deep, deep caring. And then knowing that you want to be in that place, or myself, for example, I want to be in that place to respond rather than react. And so doing that, those practices that we've talked about, but doing those practices that help to come back to the heart and come back to a clearer part of the mind, and being able to then see in that way that's not clouded, clouded by the emotions or by the imagination. And really learning how, or knowing how can I use those parts of myself to imagine the situation, to direct it, to use my emotions as you're doing. We want to use our intelligence, and we want to bring that our heart into it, and that caring. And so it gives us a way to be able to respond in that way, to be able to respond from that place of caring and love.
Well, thank you so much, Swami Satyananda. I know that this conversation has certainly helped me as I navigate a rising crisis in my life. And I trust that whoever is listening has received a nugget of wisdom, learning and beginning to navigate whatever it is that we face on a daily basis, and remembering how the daily life and the spiritual life exist together.
Thank you, Katie.
It's been a pleasure.
Namaste.
Namaste. Yasodhara Ashram is located in British Columbia on the unceded traditional territory of the Ktunaxa and Sinixt peoples. If you have questions that need answers, you can submit them to the form link in the description. You can learn more about the ashram and Swami Shivananda Radha's teachings by visiting our website at yasodhara.org.